Woo! I told you that I'd be bringing it to you, baby, and here it is. This is a standalone. These won't always be standalone, but there was so much to cover recently with, well, Star Wars, that I had to do a separate little Patreon episode for it, a little Star Wars update. So the May edition, because I don't think our next book comes out. When is it? Inferno Squadron for Star Wars comes out in July. I think I already have it pre-ordered on Audible, but anyway, there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of realizations sort of that I came to as well, as far as Star Wars in the past, I guess really the past month, because the last time I did a Star Wars update was when Thrawn by Timothy Zahn came out, which was the beginning of April, which I'll tell you still, okay, because we're going to talk about Guardians of the Whills, we're going to talk about Rebel Rising. Got a few things that I'm going to discuss here. A lot of Rogue One, actually, because, anyway, I'll explain more what I mean by that later. But even with all these, new books that have come out, and there's some other stuff that has been out too, really, Thrawn is still that king of Star Wars content, right now. That, like, if anybody wants to jump on something, that's it. As long as you're already watching Rebels, and all the movies and Clone Wars and everything. That book's so fucking good. I think since I don't think there's much in the way of content coming out in June, I think I might just read that again. Because it was so cool. Anyway, so one of the things I got done reading Rebel Rising by Beth Revis, or Revis. I don't know how her name gets pronounced, unfortunately. But Rebel Rising is a book that takes place literally right up to the moment, and I don't think this is a spoiler alert, but I'll put it out there now for you folks. Spoiler alerts. Star Wars is, all right, let's talk about this for a second. Sorry, so the book goes right up to Rogue One. There, I finished my sentence, okay? Because I have a problem sometimes with finishing my sentence, and I go into other thoughts because I think they're necessary before I finish the sentence. Regardless, the point I want to make is that it's sort of hard to spoil things with Star Wars, don't you think? Because everything is taking place in all these weird moments. You already know the after effects, the aftershock of whatever you could possibly read, right? Like, the only place where there's spoiler territory would be like, with the new trilogy, with episode 8 and 9 and whatever. But whatever. Anyway, I put the warning out there. So Rebel Rising is the story of Jyn Erso, and it is her history from when Saw Gerrera saves her, or saves her, rescues her. Which you see in the beginning of Rogue One, right? Of the movie Rogue One, to right up to the point where, like effectively. So all right, here to explain it. If you wanted to really experience Rebel Rising chronologically, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other Star Wars content, not just Rebel Rising in this. You would watch the opening to Rogue One, all the way up until you get to that stupid ass font in the opening music, which was practically non-existent. And when you get to where it says Rogue One in that dumbass font in the movie, you would stop, you'd read Rebel Rising, and then you'd finish Rebel Rising, then you'd pick right up with the following scene where she is getting, where Jyn Erso is getting rescued, by the rebel, or quote unquote rescued, getting kidnapped, maybe more accurately, especially after you read Rebel Rising. You really find out how much she hates, she actually hates the rebellion. She loves Saw, she cared about Saw and everything, but she really hates the rebellion. So anyway, you find out very quickly, so it goes right to where the rebels are, rescuing her from the Imperial work camp or whatever, and then it goes on. But that's where Rebel Rising takes place. It is literally the in-between of the first scene of Rogue One to effectively the second scene of Rogue One. It takes place right in between that. So if there was an opening crawl and it was Jyn Erso's life, it would be Rebel Rising as far as Rogue One goes. Which speaks largely, now, first off, Rebel Rising was great. I actually thought it was a very enjoyable book. Learning more about Jyn Erso was pretty wild. It is a book geared towards younger readers, not young readers, but younger readers. But I mean, it's full length. Like the audiobook was 10 hours, which there's full on adult novels that don't even touch that. And as usual, the audiobook production was phenomenal, where you get all the sound effects, the music, and everything. That's always really cool. I've said this before, I'll say it again. The way to experience Star Wars novels, I mean, the novels are great too, and generally I'm more of a reader than I am a listener, with all kinds of things. But one of the great ways to experience, Star Wars novels is if you can listen to them. Not all of them are available that way. In fact, Guardians of the Whills, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is not available in an audio format, even though I wish it was. But it's such a short read. Like you can read Guardians of the Whills inside of an hour or two that you don't, it doesn't really need to be an audiobook. So I don't mind that at all. But anyway, Rebel Rising, I really enjoyed it. You learn so much more about Jyn Erso and her attitudes. You find out how she really feels about her dad, about Galen Erso. You find out a lot about Saw, and you really start to kind of like Saw. Like, I mean, you definitely appreciate where he's coming from more, which is something that... So I had said in a previous Star Wars update for Sovereign Tech Patreon episodes, I had said that, like... Season 4 of Rebels, which is coming up this fall. I mean, we know Saw Gerrera is going to be in it. You see him in the trailer. But I had said that there needs to be a lot more Saw Gerrera in, as far as, in Season 4 of Rebels. Because we got to find out, like, how does this guy get that nuts, as to what you see in Rogue One. After reading Rebel Rising, I'm a little more like, yeah, we could actually, they don't have to spend too much time, perhaps, on it. Because you find out a lot about Saw Gerrera, about, how his paranoia starts to build up, how long he's been looking for the Death Star and all this different stuff. I mean, you get as much about Saw Gerrera as you do about Jyn Erso in many ways in the book, and it really fleshes things out quite a bit. Not anything... I didn't really feel that there was any... All right, so here... One of the things I love about the Star Wars books... Sorry, I'm all over the place here. One of the things I love about the Star Wars books is the novels themselves, since the new canon, is they've been able to explain... not just go deeper into things that you see in the movies or in the TV shows or whatever, but they've been able to, like, explain some weird oddities, or, you get little nuggets of fascinating information that have to do with the Star Wars universe that those are the things I live for. I like my universes really fleshed out. Something that I had talked about or something that used to be part of the old canon, the old expanded universe of Star Wars, that I thought was really cool. And this is going to seem like a little nothing, but I think there's a reason that it's in there. Maybe we're going to get this explained a little bit more, somewhere, I hope. But there's a point where they're talking about hyperdrives. I know, you think that's boring, right? Not really. Because in the expanded universe, you find out that humans didn't actually create the hyperdrive. Like, it was actually the Duros. The Duros are, like Cad Bane's species. He's a famous Duros. There's other Duros. And I always thought that was awesome. That, like, actually, no, you know what? It's not like Star Trek where, I mean, look, I love Star Trek, but it's not like Star Trek where, oh yeah, the humans fucking invent everything, even though Star Trek would later kind of renege on that as well and give it more to the Vulcans. But you get my point. And so there's a line towards the end of the book, and the best things always happen towards the end of the book. But there's a line towards the end of the book where Jyn Erso is saying like there's this creature complaining about humans and how they spread like a disease and whatever. And Jin's like, yeah, but we didn't invent hyperdrives. That would have, we wouldn't have hyperdrives if it weren't for, and she gets cut off. And I was like, oh, come on, tell us it was the Duros, or give us something. I think there might be a greater story to be told there about the creation of the hyperdrive that maybe they're saving. And you just kind of got a quick hint. And it's like, wait, who invented the hyperdrive in the new canon? We know who did in the old canon. And it goes beyond the Duros. Like there's whole other stories, that were, who was that? Shit, whatever. I can't think of it. Anyway. there was not Tales of the Jedi, but there was a storyline that was getting done just before Disney bought out, just before Disney bought Star Wars. That was like the origins of the Jedi, but it was terrible because it wasn't even the origins. Like there was even more of an origin story. They fucked it up. So whatever. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Sadly they didn't give us the total payoff, but it was kind of cool. So anyway, kind of the main thing I wanted to talk about here was, first off, Rebel Rising was really, really good. Learning about Jyn Erso was very interesting. Guardians of the Whills, which has to do with Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe, which are the Whills, the Guardians of the Whills, the characters that were much beloved from Rogue One, and totally understandably, especially Donnie Yen's Chirrut Imwe was just a badass little character. And funny thing, so there's that quote that I always felt kind of came off cheesy in Rogue One, which was where Jyn Erso is quoting Saw Gerrera saying, a person with a sharp stick and I don't know, whatever, the right attitude could win the day or something like that. That keeps getting said over and over. There's a reason she remembers it in Rogue One, because it keeps getting said over and over again, and it's like a constant part of her way of thinking. Throughout Rebel Rising. So now when you watch Rogue One, that line doesn't come off so cheap and so like rah, stupid, inspirational. Like now it's like, no, that's actually a central aspect of her way of thinking. So I thought that was cool. But you kind of realize how that line also explains why like Chirrut Imwe can do what he does with just a stick. Right, against a bunch of stormtroopers or something. So that little phrase, and it's a fine phrase, I get it, has a lot more prominence now. It makes a lot more sense. So Guardians of the Whills, interesting. You definitely get more of the history of Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe. This is a book definitely geared towards very young people. Nothing wrong with that. It's fine. Star Wars is something that can actually pull that off, to where you can reach a wide variety of demographics, and really everybody gets a chance to enjoy it. Not everything I think is meant for that, to where you should be able to reach to a wide variety of demographics. I think Star Trek could do it, kind of has in the past, like with the Starfleet Academy books back in the 90s. I'll tell you one that never should and is doing it now. Dune, Dune, the Dune series under the very sad stewardship of Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert. They are now saying that they're going to come out with young adult novels and like maybe even like kiddie comics. And Dune has no place being in that genre, in that demographic, because it's Dune. And it's meant to be like some of the most highly intellectual work ever. I'm not saying kids are stupid. Quite the opposite. Kids are brilliant. Okay, but this is not kid stuff. As to where Star Wars, can lend itself to kid stuff. And there's not a whole lot to say about Guardians of the Whills. You find out some interesting things. Like there's a lot of religions out there, which I think is interesting. In fact, I think it's interesting that a kid's book is talking about that, that there's a wide spectrum of beliefs that one should respect, perhaps. I'm not saying I agree with that message. I'm just saying I find it fascinating that that's kind of the makeup of the book, Guardians of the Whills. Totally valid read, well worth the read, in my opinion. And not that Star Wars hasn't done this in recent years as well. In fact, there was that book that has 4 stories in it called Before the Awakening, which gives like the story of Finn, which, admittedly, like the story of Finn, of like his training in the First Order Academy, comes off kind of strange. Now, it's cool that you find out like the story behind Traitor, which he's actually not Traitor. He's FN 2001 or 2003 or something. But Traitor is that character from The Force Awakens that actually has the stun baton that he uses against Finn using a lightsaber and everything. Really, really cool scene. Really cool, cool moment and everything. You get kind of a backstory behind that. But sort of the problem with, and maybe The Last Jedi is going to fix this, when you read Before the Awakening and you're reading Finn's story, Finn is like this exceptional cadet. Like he's really good at what he does. As to where in The Force Awakens, he's played off as sort of a goof. So it's strange. I never thought that really made sense. As to where Guardians of the Wills, there's no incoherence between what you read in Guardians of the Wills of Chirrut and Baze with what's in Rogue One. It's fine. So now after consuming all of this, or actually, you know what? There's one more I got to tell you about as far as, because this is all Rogue One content that we've been covering, and I have kind of an overarching point I want to make with it. The comic book adaptation of Rogue One, which is it 4 or 6 issues? Anyway, it's only 2 issues in right now. Right from the get-go. In fact, I had some people ask me, are you reading it? Is it really worthwhile? Because the comic book adaptation by Marvel which of course is also Disney owned, for The Force Awakens was fucking meaningless, because it was almost like a shot for shot. There was nothing added. There was you didn't get anything else from it. You might as well just watch The Force Awakens. It just didn't do anything for you. It was literally almost like just a transcribing, and that was it was disappointing, because usually, you want a little something extra, and you just didn't get it. And The Force Awakens, certainly in my opinion, doesn't have enough meat on its bones to where, you'd want to consume it in a different way anyway. The novel for The Force Awakens added some things, it allowed you to understand that Rey was accessing the dark side at certain points. There's a few other things that were interesting for the novelization of The Force Awakens, but the comic book didn't do anything for it. This is not true for, even just 2 issues in, for the Rogue One adaptation of, comic book adaptation of the movie. Because, right from the second page of the first issue, you're getting a completely new scene that is nowhere in Rogue One. In fact, the style that seems to be going with the Rogue One comic book adaptation is that it's filling in the blanks. It's putting in, and in fact, at the end of it, what's Gareth Edwards, the director and quasi-writer of Rogue One, he says that, in the back of the book, right, usually where the penciler, the artist or whatever, gets to say some words about the comic they just made. He says at the end of it that he said there were so many scenes. He said the movie could have been 5 to 9 hours long. He said Rogue One could have been so long, but they didn't do it. And he said he was so happy that a lot of the scenes that had to, take the cutting room floor or never got produced, were able to get used in some form. And so they're there for the comic book. So the comic book adaptation of Rogue One, in it, the events that actually happen in Rogue One, and this is a pretty impressive feat for the team to pull, for the comic book team to pull off. The things that actually happen in Rogue One happen very quickly in the comic. It's a couple panels, and then all the other panels are there to add more flourish and more scenes to the Rogue One story. So the Rogue One comic book, quintessential to read. It really adds so much to the movie, and it really does. There's a lot of scenes that go on that suddenly, that makes sense. That makes sense. You get a lot more of Bodhi Rook, the shuttle pilot. You get a lot more of what he was going through, what he did, why he ran away, and everything. There's talks with Galen and everything. There's so much being added to it. It's really, really slick. How they did that. I'm enjoying the hell out of that comic book. I wish all the issues were already out. So anyway, kind of the overarching thing that I want to bring to you, and it's something that I actually talked about with some friends, and that was Rogue One is really not just the movie Rogue One, and this might not be an original thought for some of you, but I'm just putting it out there. Rogue One is a multimedia experience. In fact, the closest thing I can relate it to is also a previous Star Wars story, before Disney owned it, and that is my favorite, actually, Shadows of the Empire. In Shadows of the Empire, with Shadows of the Empire, which came out in the 90s, okay, you had there was the novel. It was by Stephen Perry, not to be confused with the lead singer of Journey, or ex-lead singer of Journey. I love Steve Perry. But Stephen Perry, who wrote Shadows of the Empire, great book. Also another one that you could read very, in an afternoon if you really pushed it. It had a soundtrack, which was, again, this never was a movie, as far as, Rogue One at least has a movie, but Shadows of the Empire never had a movie. But you had, you had a soundtrack. You had the comic book, which had a different perspective than the novel. The novel was kind of the main thing, but then you had the you had the comic book, which the perspective of the comic book, if I remember right, was more of from like Boba Fett's perspective, which it wasn't really a Boba Fett story, but whatever. Then you had the video game, which was all Dash Rendar's perspective. The novel was the perspective of course, Han's in Carbonite, so Han's not in it. But it's from Leia and Luke, pretty much, and then Prince Shizor and Guri, of course. But then, in the video game, you had Dash Rendar's perspective. Then you had the art book, with the brothers Hildebrandt, which was beautiful. And then you had Secrets of Shadows of the Empire, which is like a whole making special that even fleshed out more details about Shadows of the Empire. And the video game, of course, that I mentioned was, wildly popular. I mean, it was one of the biggest titles for the Nintendo 64 at the time. It did come out for PC as well. You can get it today on GOG.com, and Steam might have it now too, but I always recommend frequenting GOG.com. And then there was a sequel comic book series called Evolution, Shadows of the Empire Evolution, which had to do with Guri, and I loved it. But the really cool thing about Shadows of the Empire was it was a cohesive story, but it was spread out across so many different mediums that, to really know everything that was going on, you had to do a lot. I mean, you had to play the video game, you had to read the comic book, and as well as the sequel comic book, you had to read the book, and if you really wanted to, deep dive, you would look at the art book from the brothers Hildebrandt, and you would, you'd read Secrets of Shadows of the Empire, and you'd listen to the music as well, which was amazing. That Joel McNeely, who was a, fine composer, did what, in my opinion, one of the best Star Wars soundtracks ever done. To something that's not a movie. Again, he just kind of had an idea of the scenes that he had to write for, and he wrote the music, and it's beautiful. So Rogue One is in that vein. Of course, with Rogue One, though, we actually get a movie. Because to really appreciate everything that's going on in Rogue One, like, I need to watch it again now. I mean, and I've already watched it countless times, but I need to watch it again because, like, I've really got new eyes on, now, after reading Guardians of the Whills, Rebel Rising, Catalyst, which I had already read Catalyst, which is the prequel novel for Rogue One that was originally released before the movie came out, back in November 2016. And then with the Rogue One comic book, I mean, that's completely changing the way you look at Rogue One. Like, the comic book especially might be the biggest thing that does the change. Or that gives you new eyes when you're looking at, when you're watching Rogue One again. And then, in a way, it all kind of, ends with A New Hope. Like, A New Hope becomes an even better film, which is something that I had said Rogue One would probably do. The problem is that Rogue One didn't really have it the movie didn't have it internally. Okay. What I was expecting was, at the time before Rogue One came out, was like, okay, this is going to like have so much inside the movie that it's really going to make A New Hope a much better film. Now, the movie alone of Rogue One, I don't think accomplished that task. Certainly, it's a lot more enjoyable to watch New Hope after, that fucking Darth Vader scene at the end of Rogue One, right? but it didn't really deliver that job. But now with Rebel Rising, Guardians of the Whills, the comic book of Rogue One, and then, also Catalyst, and then Rogue One, the movie itself. Now you do have that where A New Hope is suddenly like this much deeper experience, I think. Because I've always felt that actually A New Hope, as far as the movie goes, kind of sucks. Like, really, I mean, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi are two of the greatest movies ever made. Bar none. The same, in my opinion, cannot be said of A New Hope. In fact, Brett Venat and I have joked, Brett of School Sucks, we've joked often and said to each other, yeah, if they ever remade A New Hope, we'd be all right with that. Like, you could do that because it just doesn't stand up as well. But with this huge backstory that is Rogue One, suddenly now it makes a lot more sense. And this was kind of the point that I was talking about with some friends, is that really Rogue One is not just a movie, like I was saying, kind of like Shadows of the Empire, where it's this multimedia experience. And I actually discussed, in fact, one of them was Roger Paxton, who does the Resist the Empire podcast, which is a sponsor of Sovereign Tech, but Roger and I knew each other long before then. And he's a hardcore Star Wars fan. And, understand, like, when someone says to me they're a Star Wars fan, that's a bold fucking statement you're making, baby. Like, I mean, you've got to live up. And Roger lives up. I mean, he's the real deal. And, so anyway, I gave this order that I said, like, okay, this is how you experience Rogue One. Like, with Shadows of the Empire, how do you experience Shadows of the Empire? Well, first you read the book, then you read the comic, then you play the game, and then you read the Evolution comic, right? And then everything else is gravy after that. With Rogue One, I think there's kind of an order that you want to read this in. Now, the order I first came up with was Rebel Rising. That was number one. So read that first. Then read Rogue One Catalyst. Then read Guardians of the Whills. Then watch the movie Rogue One. And then read the comic book adaptation of Rogue One. Because the comic book adaptation doesn't make sense without the movie. Like, you have to have the movie for the comic book adaptation to really, like, click. But the movie clicks way better once you read the comic book adaptation. So maybe, somewhere in there, after you go through this whole thing, you want to watch the movie again. Now, as far as the novelization of Rogue One, I enjoyed the novelization. There's not a whole, Alexander Freed wrote it and he did fine, but there's not a whole lot added to it. I'd say that's a bonus and that you could do that at any time. You don't really have to read the novelization for Rogue One, to understand, what's going down and what's happening. But Roger actually corrected me. And I told Roger, I said, you can boast about this, my friend. I said, because there's not a whole lot of people that can change my mind. There's not many individuals that have done that in my life. But Roger did. And he gave me he's like, yeah, but, he discussed it with me. And it was like, okay, you know what? You're right. Your order is far better. And so pretty much the major change that he made is he recommended read Guardians of the Whills first. And I'll explain why he said that in a second. He said, read Guardians of the Whills, then read Catalyst, then read Rebel Rising, and then do Rogue One, the comic book adaptation, and so on. Now, the reason he said read Guardians of the Whills first, and I agree with him, is that it's really a separate story as to where, Rebel or Catalyst, Rebel Rising, and then Rogue One, the movie itself, like they all hit each other. Like literally, each one takes place right after the other. That like Catalyst is, there's parts of Catalyst where Jyn Erso's not born yet. So Catalyst, Jyn Erso gets born. They go off to Lasu, right? I want to call it Lamasu, but I hadn't thought about that. There might be a connection there. Lamasu is a Sumerian animal, but I won't go into that right now. And there's a Bitcoin company named that too. But anyway, again, Catalyst goes right up to where the Ursos run off to Lasu, and they kind of foster their friendship with Saw Gerrera and everything. Then Rebel Rising picks up right from that, where Jyn Erso goes off with Saw Gerrera, and they go and do their thing, and that ends literally right at the beginning of Rogue, or after the opening title sequence of Rogue One. So I agree. That's really the way to experience this, is to do Guardians of the Whills, which is cool because it gives you, it's nice to read that because then you kind of have that backstory of Chirrut and Baze. And then, and when you meet them in Rogue One, it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, it definitely fleshes things out quite a bit more. So so that's the order that you want to experience Rogue One. And I think that this is really great that this sort of thing exists. This is something I've wanted from when Disney was saying how hard they're going to push the new canon, like that everything is going to be interconnected, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, this is going to create some awesome multimedia experiences where you're going to get a significantly better experience. When you watch the movie of Rogue One, or whenever you watch whatever movie comes out, if you have really consumed all of the extraneous canon content that's out there, and this is really true with Rogue One, that movie becomes just eons better once you experience all of this stuff. But like I said, in that order. So if you haven't consumed any of this yet, you want to do Guardians of the Whills, then read Rogue One Catalyst if you haven't already read that. And in fact, honestly, it wouldn't hurt to read it again. Then do Rebel Rising, and then watch Rogue One, and then hit up that comic book adaptation, and you are going to get just an incredible experience there. And then once you're done with the comic book adaptation of Rogue One, I imagine there's going to be scenes in the last couple issues or the last issue of the comic book adaptation of Rogue One, where there's going to probably be a lot more Princess Leia and maybe even Captain Antilles, not Wedge Antilles, Captain Antilles of the Tantive 4. I always called it Tantive, but apparently it's Tantive. Anyway, of the Tantive 4 and all that. And so you're going to get a much better run-in, even though it's already great, but you're going to get a great run-in to A New Hope. And then once you've read all that, you can knock out A New Hope. In fact, honestly, you could marathon this, okay? If you're like me, and if you listen to audiobooks at like 2.5, 2.3, 2.5x, something like that, I think in one day you could knock out that entire list, including watching A New Hope at the end of it. And I, someday, if for whatever reason I happen to be alone for a day, I might just try and pull this off. Because you could listen to the books. You know, you could listen to Catalyst and you could listen to Rebel Rising, you know, inside of 5 hours, if not less. You know, I mean, and then you could have that whole story and boom, 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 and there you go. And I think that would be actually be really, really cool. Like that would be a lot of fun to do. So yeah, so, you know, once you consume all this, I mean, like I said, Rogue One, it becomes a really great movie, but it's because it's more than a movie. It's because there's so much other stuff going on. And when, especially Rebel Rising was really the piece for me, I think that was missing, because you definitely get to know Jyn Erso so well that suddenly a lot of the choices of how her character acts in Rogue One make a whole lot more sense. I'm still disappointed. You know, when I reviewed Rogue One back in December on Sovereign Tech, you know, this is a movie where we know for a fact, because of things that Ben Mendelsohn said and others, and I didn't even bring up there's that short story from Star Wars Insider that had Krennic in it. You could read that too, but I didn't even bring that up. But we know that there's a whole other version of Rogue One out there, which I just theorized back in December, but now we know, like, that, yes, absolutely, there's a very different version of this movie that exists, you know, in varying forms on some cutting room floor. Proverbially, of course, or, you know, metaphorically, there's not really cutting room floors anymore. It's all done digitally. But, and like, I was really disappointed because I wanted Jyn Erso to be this really badass female character. I wanted her to be, you know, the Sarah Connor of Star Wars. Really, that's what I was, and that's what was getting presented in the trailers. It wasn't like I was just making that shit up. Okay, in the trailers, she was that badass. In fact, I was kind of hopeful. In Rebel Rising, it actually ends in the conference room, you know, in the war room, effectively on Yavin 4, where you know, where everybody's there. Mon Mothma's there. You know, Bail Organa's there talking to Jyn Erso and everything. And you get a few more lines in it. I was hoping they were going to sneak in that line where she says, "I rebel," because that was the coolest shit in the world in the trailers. Like, that was so badass. But that didn't happen. But anyway, you know, you do get this real, you know, badass young woman, you know, in this book, you know, or in Rebel Rising, that, yeah, I just thought it delivered. That was so cool. So Rogue One, far better film now after you go through all that. Maybe the most important thing that adds to the film, though, maybe even more than Rebel Rising, though that might be the most important, would be the comic book. Even, like I said, I'm only 2 issues in. It's already added a shit ton to that movie. And I wouldn't mind if someday they did a director's cut of some kind, and they added on, you know, what's in there, you know, what's in the comic book. Because, I mean, since it's in the comic book, like, it's already canon, so, you know, you can go ahead and do that. And this is something, so Disney has this rule with the kind of, you know, with the larger Star Wars canon, and like they have a hierarchy as far as what's the most important. And the rule is that whatever's in the movies is the highest canon. And then underneath, pretty much everything else is underneath that. Okay, so what you say, if you're reading the book, not the comic book, but just the book of Rogue One, the novelization by Alexander Freed, who also wrote Catalyst, by the way. Say you're reading that, and there's something in it that slightly differs from what's in the movie. The movie is what wins the day. The movie is the thing that, okay, no, that's canon right there. Whatever's in the movie, if there's a slight little difference. But the fact is that the books can have slight little differences. In fact, like I said, that line in Rebel Rising at the end where she's in the, kind of the war room with Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and everything, some of there's things said there that are either slightly different or more than what you see in the film. My point being in saying this is that, but I mean, obviously what's in the film is the real canon and what's most important. But my point being is that what's in the comic books could be added later, and it's okay if it's a little bit different. Inside of, within the film, some like director's cut version of Rogue One. It would really be okay. There wouldn't be like this earth-shattering moment in the canon or something, that changed everything and broke the great Star Wars canon. So I wouldn't mind if they did that. I think that'd be kind of cool. And we're also seeing this happening more because, like with Lost Stars in Japan, and I imagine it'll come to America sooner or later, they're doing a manga of Lost Stars. So obviously, you can kind of change things up. Now, the interesting thing is that question's got to get answered. What's the more canon version of the story of Lost Stars? Is it the novel by Claudia Gray, or is it the manga that's being done online in Japan? And we haven't heard the answer to that yet. I mean, maybe somebody's tweeted it, Pablo, and we just don't know. I'll have to find out. So anyway, really, really impressed at kind of the multimedia experience that Rogue One has become. And it's going to be even more so because season 4 of Rebels is probably going to run right up into Rogue One as well. So that movie is, and this is kind of what I had said. In fact, I was on an episode of School Sucks, which I made available as a Patreon for Sovereigntech as well, where Brett, Stephanie, and I were all talking about Star Wars, and it was just after Rogue One had come out. So it was from this past December. And I had said on there, I said, 5-10 years down the line, Rogue One's probably going to become like one of the most important Star Wars movies ever made, if not the most important, because like so much is going to funnel right into that. Like, and my point at that time was that, well, you're going to find out more about Jeddah, about Jeddah's past. Like there's probably going to be TV series or movies that take place thousands of years before A New Hope, where you're going to find out, about Jeddah in its prime, back when it was like, a really important, even more important of a city and all this. And so then when you see Jeddah get destroyed in Rogue One, you're just going to be like, holy shit, I can't believe that happened. They blew up Jeddah. As to where right now we don't exactly get it, right? Like we don't understand why it's so important. We have a clue, but we don't really know. And so this is, with all of the content, all the, books and comics that I mentioned in this, I mean, Rogue One already has become, a more important film, and there's already so much wrapped around it. I mean, this is going to be a centerpiece film, in my opinion. So, and then now I'm just, even more bolstered in that opinion just because of, what I've read already. So great shit, and like I said, Rogue One now, to really experience it, you've got to do more than just the movie. You really do. You've got to take in the comics, you got to take in the books to really get everything that's going on. And I assure you that the juice is worth the squeeze in this. So anyway, we're already about 40 minutes and I don't want to go much longer on it. But I do want to talk about just an update on the comic books. And this isn't anything new really that I've said. I've said it in the past, like the comic books, the Rogue One adaptation is great, but that's kind of a unique animal. Really, the comic books they've been all right, but they've just been all right. Like they haven't been really great in the past few months. And I mean, the Poe Dameron books have been pretty good. There's some kind of cool stuff happening in that. I'll tell you, spoiler alerts, folks. So the latest Poe Dameron was issue 14. There's a good chance, I think, we're going to see in episode 9 of Star Wars that Poe Dameron's going to end up leading the Resistance or whatever, organization exists that controls effectively the defensive force of the universe. Whoever controls all the X-Wings. They really set things up for like there's literally a line where, General Organa, Leia, is saying, I'm not always going to be here. And and she's saying it to Poe, you're one of those rare people that can lead, like that has all these unique properties on what you can do. And so that's happening, and that's interesting too, because originally the character of Poe Dameron was supposed to die very early on in The Force Awakens. Like he wasn't supposed to be a continued character, but now obviously he's one of the most beloved of, the new canon. So that, just keep your eye out for that happening. The issues have been pretty good. Like I said, Poe Dameron's been a fairly solid comic, but they're, the problem with the Poe Dameron comic is they're always dancing around revealing a lot of shit that's going on in the Star Wars universe at that time. Again, this is just before Force Awakens. And they have to save a lot of that for the movies, of course, for the new trilogy to really explore. So the Poe Dameron comic, I think it gets a little weakened by that. The Star Wars comic, amazingly, they've been doing like this Yoda story arc that actually takes place before Episode 1, which was cool because like Qui-Gon Jinn was in it and everything, briefly. It's been pretty weak. Like, I'm not... You'd think a Yoda story would be such a great thing to do, and it just hasn't really been delivering. The best thing going. So my statement that I've made many times still stands. The best Star Wars comic right now out of the new canon is easily the Lando series. It is great. All right, but the best thing going right now is the Dr. Aphra series. And it's actually been really cool. Like they're exploring a lot of Jedi history and, Force user history, and, you're ending up with some pretty wild stories. And Aphra is such a great character, and you find out she's a lesbian, great, or at least bisexual, maybe. Fucking awesome. Well, I think it's pretty explicit that she's lesbian because she says she's not into guys. Like, in fact, there's this one Imperial, commander woman that she's like, oh, I think you're cute, and anyway, it becomes very explicit that she's not into dudes. So that's been a very fun comic, and now they started doing a crossover event, kind of like Vader Down from last year. They're doing a crossover event between the Star Wars ongoing comic and Dr. Aphra called Screaming Citadel. They're only one issue in. That issue was amazing. Like, it was so good. It is wild. Like, they are doing some crazy shit in Star Wars with that. Like, you have this, spoiler alerts, folks. You literally have this woman that is like this blood or like soul, like energy sucking space vampire, which I love those. Space vampires as an idea is great. In fact, I'll tell you something. One of my favorite shows of all time, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century from 1980. With Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray and all that. There's an episode of that. There's 5-6 episodes that even, kind of your sci-fi historians who generally don't look too fondly on Buck Rogers. I love it, but I get it that a lot of people don't look too fondly on it. There's 5 or 6 episodes in that where people are like, yeah, that's a pretty fucking good science fiction right there. One of them being Space Vampire from season 1 of Buck Rogers. And I agree. In fact, it's the episode I've probably watched the most of Buck Rogers. I love it. I think it's just top-notch sci-fi. And so, anytime space vampires kind of come into even though that sounds cheesy, it can be done really, really well. And I'm hoping Screaming Citadel does that. This is a very stylish comic. I'm very, very pleased with, at least so far, with the direction they're taking with it. In fact, there's this point where they have to wear certain formal wear, and Luke, I think, looks badass. I think he looks great. So I'm pleased by that. Interesting things happening there. Hopefully the comics are going to start picking shit up. The Darth Maul comic series that's going, what is that, a 5 or 6 issue run? Or maybe it's a 4 issue. That's been very cool. I've actually really liked the Darth Maul comic series, but they've been like stalling how much comes out. Like it seems like it's been a slow release cycle for that. Obviously, to some degree, they were waiting for Darth Maul to die before they could tell part of the story, I would assume. But it's a prequel comic. It has to do with Maul, when he's getting trained by Darth Sidious. And there's one really cool, I'll mention this, there's one really cool, almost like a nursery rhyme that apparently gets told to Sith about what happened to them on, not Moraband, but on the planet at the end of season 2 of Rebels. Where, remember where Ahsoka and Darth Vader, do their matchup, just a great episode. There's a nursery rhyme around that planet that the Sith still tell each other to that day. And it starts off with far above, far below. And then it kind of goes on saying, you got to be careful or you'll fall or something. But it was like that far above, far below sounds a lot like the real world, not Star Wars, the real world Emerald Tablet, which is as above, so below. And I thought I think there might be something there. I've talked about this for years on Sovereign Tech, that ever since Disney bought Star Wars, they've been getting into some very odd spiritual realms, dualism, a lot of other things. And in fact, it's interesting just how much, and Rogue One is also a centerpiece as far as this goes, how much they've been introducing a whole lot more aspects of the Force since Disney bought it out. Like it's not just Jedi and Sith anymore. Now you have the Bendu, and you have the other religions that get they're described on Jeddah. Like if you read the Rogue One visual guide, there's a bunch in that are, that's very interesting. So yeah, I don't know what Disney's got going on here. I don't want to speculate. I could get into some very real conspiracy theories, but I'm not going to do that because, I'm just here to talk Star Wars and have fun. So, yeah. So, all right. So I think that about covers everything that's really going on. I'm still very hopeful, very pleased with the direction that Disney has been taking Star Wars. Very excited about, that the Last Jedi trailer was phenomenal. Or the teaser trailer, I should say, is great. I actually imagine the next month or so, maybe even a D23, that we're going to get a full-on trailer. Like, I don't think they're going to waste much time on that. Just great stuff going on. Everything's looking good. Star Wars show, they're still doing pretty good with that. I think they've cleaned that up. The Star Wars show is on YouTube. It's Andy Gutierrez and another guy, Andy's a woman, but the other guy, I forget his name. They changed who the male host is this season. But Andy Gutierrez I think she's wonderful. She does great work. She's really cool. And the Star Wars show, I felt like they've been doing some really great stuff this time around because they did take a break back in January, I think. And the show was definitely trying to find its footing in its what could be called its first season. But I'm pretty pleased where that's going too. Just a lot of great stuff going on. And I do hope, because how well the Star Wars show is doing, and a lot of the content that they're pushing out, like say through the Star Wars YouTube channel and everything, I really do hope that in the near future we get an actual like Star Wars Netflix, like not Star Wars on Netflix, but like kind of like how the WWE has its own channel. I'm looking forward to where where you have, what is it, WWE 24/7 or whatever the hell that's called. I'm looking forward to when there's a subscription service where it's just Star Wars and it's all Star Wars content all the fucking time. I am so on board for that, and I'd happily lay down, $7-9, whatever a month, to be able to get that, to have like the Star Wars show, and a bunch of other exclusive content and everything. Maybe watch Celebration on it, kind of like with the WWE, with WWE Online, where you can watch WrestleMania and everything. That would be really cool. Or if it even lets you watch, I doubt this would happen, but it'd be amazing if it actually let you watch, the movies at home when they're out in theaters or something. Like that would be really cool. So I'm hopeful for that sort of thing would happen, and that you would get some kind of exclusive content through that, and maybe make like a whole fan membership out of it. That's a direction that I really want Disney to go. I mean, because honestly, like, I already hash out so much, for Star Wars content anyway. I mean, and speaking of like with the WWE 24/7, whatever the hell they call that. It's terrible. Someone I know. Actually, you know what? I know Daryl Perry might actually be listening to this, and he's probably screaming at me. but anyway, the WWE Online, their channel was WWE 24/7 or something. That service, it's like $10 a month. When I was growing up, when I was a wrestling fan, like I was paying $40-50 a month to get the monthly pay-per-views. To say nothing of what I was paying for for cable access. To watch Raw and SmackDown and everything. Like, it's a steal. Like, that WWE network, that's what it is, the WWE network. I think that's what they call it, yeah. I mean, that for $10 a month, holy shit, that's great. You get the pay-per-views, you get WrestleMania, you get all this stuff, you get this all-day-long crap, you get all these extra shows. I mean, it's a fucking bargain. Yeah, Star Wars, do that. Like, please, give me all of that content. I mean, I wish I was still a wrestling fan, because it's an amazing time to be. And you can watch all that history, like old WCW matches and everything on that. That's insane. What a great deal. And so, yeah, I would totally pay for that kind of shit to exist for Star Wars. I mean, maybe it's a few years down the line. Maybe they have to do a few more cartoons and, a few more shows and whatever to really make that viable to where you can watch that. But, yeah, I'll pony up. Absolutely. So anyway, yeah, I love the direction that Star Wars is going. I'm really pleased. Some of the comic books have been duds. Some of the books have been lackluster in comparison. Like Heir to the Jedi was pretty rough, but overall, like I haven't felt like there was anything that like, oh, that just was shit. Like that was just terrible, And as to where I could definitely say that with like the old expanded universe, I can definitely point at things where I can say that was horrible. Courtship of Princess Leia, some other stuff. I mean, that's easy pickings. But like there was some really bad crap back then. As to where now I can't really think of where I'm like, yeah, that was really bad. So Disney's doing a great job. Anyway, that's enough of that. There's your Star Wars update. And I think I ranted long enough and just nice little extra content for you. I do have the Monticello episode. I'm going to be releasing that. Maybe I might even release that tomorrow. We'll see. So anyway, I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.